Heimerdinger mentions that the world is becoming increasingly chaotic, and as the leader of the clan, he had no choice but to take responsibility for preserving his people. Therefore, he returned to the Sacred Hammer Summit with the purpose of rebuilding the Dwarven Kingdom. The king's son asks Gigi if they are actually the hero and the demon queen. He also wants to know why she never told him before. The swordswoman apologizes and explains that they decided to live in anonymity. To avoid bothering them, she could not reveal any information about them. However, now that Heimerdinger, a former subordinate of the Demon Queen, has recognized her, there is no longer a need to hide the truth. Meanwhile, the queen asks where the others are and requests that the Dwarf King tell her everything. Heimerdinger nods and explains that there is no need to say much, starting by informing them about Malfoy, as he was the one who founded the Dark Guild, plunging the world into chaos and destruction. Furthermore, Malfoy has been capturing people of different races to use them as test subjects for his life magic experiments. The king confesses that many dwarves were victims of his creations. On the other hand, Lord Jim Jim has been searching for the queen's whereabouts. It is said that, in the process, he met a human woman, and they had a child together. However, he was later marked as a target by the Dark Guild and has now disappeared. He also mentions Mugol, revealing that his fate was tragic, as all the great orc chiefs united to betray and eliminate him. That event was recorded as the beginning of the orc race's decline, for after Mugol's death, the chief divided his territory as he pleased. However, this also exacerbated internal exclusion among the orcs, plunging them into an endless cycle of fratricide to the point that, even now, they find it difficult to unite as a single force. As for the elf Tavira, all that is known is that she sacrificed her own life to bless her people, but no further details are available. Regarding the destination they wish to reach, the kingdom of Aristotle, it was originally a human settlement led by the great priest Barlow. However, later the young Aristotle used the power of science to make a great contribution to the fight against the Dark Guild. Since human life is short, countless leaders have changed since Aristotle's death, and the region has become increasingly isolated. After hearing all this, the queen calls them fools, and upon learning that the Dark Guild was rising, asks why they did not unite to fight it. Instead of doing so, each acted on their own. She also mentions that she had ordered everyone to forget their differences and seek peace, and she asks the Dwarf King if he and all his subjects have forgotten her command. Heimerdinger, with a trembling voice, apologizes and explains that, at first, everyone followed her principles. But over time, there would always be people who were more selfish and arrogant. Even he had to admit that he found himself in that same situation. Lepping, after hearing everything, asks Elizabeth not to blame them and explains that this happens when there is no director in the study hall. There will always be restless people who start making noise and disturb others. The queen, upon hearing him, turns around in a good mood and responds that if it is him speaking, then there is no problem. Gigi calls the great hero and asks him to help the Dwarven Kingdom solve the crisis of being unable to forge weapons above S grade. The king's son clarifies that he does not question the legendary hero's abilities, but the reality is that the celestial ore has been depleted, and unless another meteorite falls from the sky, it will not be possible to forge S-grade weapons again. The Dwarf King comments that, although he does not want to admit it, what his son Brian said is true. He reports that he has been secluded there and has conducted more than 10,000 experiments, but all have failed. He adds that without the celestial ore, he can only replicate A-level weapons or, at best, a lower-quality S-level weapon. Lepping believes that if they truly need that material to create S-level weapons, then they are in serious trouble. At the same time, he thinks that the dwarves of that world are amazing, as they even use precious meteorites to forge weapons. It is then that Heimerdinger explains that the celestial mineral is not a material for forging weapons, but a special sharpening stone, and that its discovery dates back to his grandparents' generation. He recounts that long ago, his dwarf race was a nomadic people of blacksmiths who traveled everywhere, extracting minerals and forging weapons for others. Until his grandfather led his people in search of minerals and found that place, rich in resources and perfect for settling. Additionally, there was the peculiar Sacred Hammer Mountain. Exploring the mountain and relying on his talent for finding minerals, his grandfather guided his people to dig deep into its depths, until they reached exactly the place where they now stand. There, they discovered a 7-colored stone, never seen before. Everyone was amazed, and his grandfather assumed that the stone came from outer space. Intrigued, he tried striking it with his hoe to obtain some fragments and analyze them. But to his surprise, upon striking it, his hoe transformed into a golden one. Since then, the news that the celestial mineral could enhance weapons when used as a sharpening stone spread quickly among the tribe, and all the dwarves began sharpening their weapons with it. Day after day, year after year, the celestial mineral allowed the dwarves to craft increasingly advanced weapons to protect themselves, leading to the foundation of the Dwarven Kingdom. However, its excessive use consumed half of their reserves. To secure the kingdom's future, it was decided to restrict its use exclusively to the top one. Over time, wars between races intensified, and the demand for advanced weapons kept growing. In response, the rules changed. First, the use of the celestial mineral was limited to the top 100 blacksmiths, then to 50, later to 20, and finally to only 10, until the point where only the king had access to it. Fortunately, more than 500 years ago, Her Majesty the Demon Queen managed to pacify the conflicts between the races on her own, drastically reducing the consumption of the celestial mineral. However, when the stone reached her hands, only a watermelon-sized fragment remained, and since then it has been used solely to forge cutlery and tableware. Sometime later, the queen disappeared for 500 years, and the world once again fell into chaos. Heimerdinger confessed that he had no choice but to use the celestial mineral to forge S-level weapons and ally with the Guild of the Holy Swords to confront the Dark Guild. That was when the last fragment of celestial mineral was depleted. 5 years have passed since then, and although Heimerdinger has been searching for a suitable substitute, after thousands of attempts, he has yet to recreate an S-level weapon. Heimerdinger trembles as he says that the dwarves' legacy, forged thanks to the celestial mineral, will disappear along with the extinction of that very mineral, the same one that granted them glory. He wonders if everything will. His son, worried, asks why he blames himself in such a way and states that in reality, it is his own fault for not surpassing his master. Lepping, after analyzing the situation, responds sincerely. He assures them that he has extensive experience in forging and asks if he can give it a try. Although he does not fully understand swords or magic, when it comes to forging, that is his specialty. Moreover, being in the Dwarven Kingdom, he cannot miss the opportunity to exchange knowledge with these masters. Heimerdinger nods and, after a brief pause, points out that if he is not mistaken, the spirit of the weapon must be the sacred sword wielded by the Demon Queen in the past. Then he points at Alpha and mentions that he had examined it before. However, in the end, he discovered that it is a perfect work of nature, something completely impossible to replicate. Intrigued, he asks the hero if he was the one who created it. Lepping replies no, clarifying that his work does not resemble Alpha in any way. His words somehow seem to boost the sword's self-esteem. At that moment, the hero lightly kicks his small companion, who, understanding the signal, quickly pulls out a sharpening stone. Lepping explains that he knew he would visit the Dwarven Kingdom. so he brought some forging tools to exchange knowledge. As he shows the sharpening stone, he mentions that he frequently uses it and finds it very useful. Then, he asks if it could be of help to them. Heimerdinger, upon seeing the stone, seems to become furious. With a severe tone, he asks if he has any idea how many materials he has tested before and claims that using that stone would yield no results. He insists that it would be impossible to use it on their weapons. However, Elizabeth intervenes and with a firm tone asks if he really dares to question the Queen's man. Faced with her challenge, the dwarf hesitates and finally grants permission to use the stone. Then, the Queen begins to release a bit of her power and with a stern expression asks if he has not yet made the arrangements immediately. Heimerdinger, upon witnessing Her Majesty's anger, feels a chill run down his spine and with a hurried movement responds that he will do it right away. His voice, though firm, betrays a slight hesitation under the pressure imposed by the Queen. Without further delay, they take the hero to a place where the heat is stifling, with rivers of lava or molten metal flowing like currents of liquid fire. Lepping, upon witnessing the scene, curiously asks if that is the original material used to forge the weapons. Brian, with a tone of pride and confidence, nods and replies that it is, explaining that it is a liquid refined mineral mixed with more than 100 different types of materials. He adds that the exact proportion of the mixture was determined by the King Father after centuries of experience and refinement, thus achieving a perfect balance for the creation of legendary weapons. Then, the drunken master blacksmith Brian skillfully takes a tool and, spinning it in the air with a fluid motion, introduces himself with a confident smile. He declares that, although he cannot yet compare to his father, he has been recognized as a prodigy in blacksmithing and has perfected his skills in the rough forging phase, demonstrating his talent even under the effects of alcohol. With a precise gesture, he dips the tool into the molten metal and, without wasting a second, tosses it into the air. As the burning liquid dances in the air like a river suspended in time, Brian drinks from a container. Then, with a powerful breath, he sprays the liquid as if it were a misting spray, enveloping the metal in a fine mist of liquor. The clash between the scorching metal and the drink creates an immediate effect, solidifying the metal with a unique tempering process. From within the smoky mist, the shape of a gleaming sword emerges. With impressive precision, Brian extends his hand and, at the last moment, catches the sword before it hits the ground. A little drunk, Brian informs his father that the final key stage of the forging process, polishing, will be left in his charge. It is then that the Dwarf King, without hesitation, bites the piece of metal firmly, while his son holds it with both hands and pulls it out with great force and speed. This technique is known as iron jaw sharpening. Lepping, attentively observing the entire scene, cannot help but be astonished. In his mind, there is no doubt that the dwarves possess an incredibly wild, almost instinctive forging style, as if they were more in tune with metal than with the conventional logic of human blacksmiths. Right after completing the final step in creating the sword, Brian turns to his father and, with some expectation, asks him to evaluate his work. The Dwarf King takes the sword in his hands and puts on his magnifying glasses to examine it carefully. His eyes scan the blade with precision, measuring every detail and checking the quality of the edge. After a long moment of analysis, he declares that the Drunken 100 Minerals Storm has a special effect. Its blade, forged with unique materials, grants the wielder a temporary state of euphoria and immunity to pain as long as they are drunk. Additionally, when striking an enemy, there is a 30% chance that the impact will immediately intoxicate them, affecting their senses and combat ability. The hero, upon hearing such an ability, cannot help but express his amazement. He comments with a hint of envy that it is an exceptional evaluation skill and that he feels somewhat jealous. For his part, Brian, still somewhat nervous, asks his father what he thinks of the sword in terms of overall quality. But Heimenderger, without warning, takes the sword and crushes it with an angry gesture. His expression is stern as he responds that, despite its special effect, the sword only reaches high A rank. Brian, feeling that he has failed, lowers his gaze in frustration. He immediately apologizes, saying that he is useless and that he has surely disappointed his father. However, the Dwarf King, without hesitation, ruffles his hair with one hand in a paternal gesture. With a firm but proud voice, he asks what he is talking about. With a smile, he tells him that what he has achieved is a great advancement, that he is young, and that without a doubt, in a few hundred years, he will surpass him. Brian, moved by his father's words, sincerely thanks him for his support and words of comfort. It is at that moment that Heimenderger announces that it is the turn of the legendary hero. He thinks, although the Demon Queen herself has recognized his power, he doubts that his blacksmithing skills can surpass those of his dwarf race, whose talent in forging is unparalleled. Lepping, with a serene yet determined expression, declares that he will now demonstrate his skills. As he prepares, he reflects on the importance of his work. He knows that what he is about to forge will be evaluated by the Dwarf King, which fills him with both excitement and expectation. The scene is observed with great interest by the Queen and the others present. Elizabeth, always observant, is the first to comment. She expresses her surprise at seeing Lepping demonstrate his talent outside his usual environment. Then, in a praising tone, she congratulates Gigi, acknowledging that, on this occasion, his planning deserves recognition. The swordswoman, flattered, slightly bows her head in gratitude to the Queen. Internally, she reflects that, although swordless combat has its value, not everyone can understand it immediately. Therefore, the creation of the Dwarf King's S-rank weapons is essential to face the imminent arrival of the Dark Sea. Alpha also intervenes, adding a perceptive comment. He explains that S-rank weapons are ephemeral since, if they cannot materialize into weapon spirits, they remain mere extensions of their users. Then, with a sharp gaze, he reflects that, according to his knowledge, he himself is the most powerful weapon ever created. Wang Kai, intrigued, throws a direct question at him, asking if he is referring to the spirits of weapons, and questioning what about. Alpha responds that he is an intelligent piece of furniture and already understands his comprehension. However, he cannot understand the knives, forks, and plates of the house. The little dog, intrigued by the answer, then asks what they really are, to which the sacred sword solemnly responds that those utensils are not mere instruments, but the dwelling place of the gods. Meanwhile, Lepping prepares to begin the forging process. With precise movements, he takes some of the molten metal and carefully pours it into a mold, ensuring that the shape gains consistency. The king, watching closely, cannot help but wonder if all he is going to make is a simple dagger. From his perspective, the process seems too simple for a weapon worthy of mention. At first glance, his assumption seems correct, as Lepping removes the piece from the mold almost immediately and proceeds to cool it with a controlled bath. Examining it closely, he confidently comments that only the final step remains: polishing, a crucial stage to perfect the details of the blade and give it the proper edge. On the other hand, Brian expresses his opinion about the forging technique used. With a critical tone, he points out that he finds nothing particularly special about it and even dares to claim that, in terms of skill, both he and the other artisans of the Dwarf Kingdom are clearly superior. However, Heimenderger, not letting appearances deceive him, turns his gaze toward his son and asks a question with evident interest, wanting to know if he has noticed it as well. His son nods with conviction and explains that yes, the difference lies in the philosophy behind the process. While they see forging as a constant struggle to achieve supreme quality in every weapon, Lepping, on the other hand, enjoys every moment of the process as if it were an art in itself and not just a means to an end. And with that, we've reached the end of this week's chapter. If you made it all the way to the end, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this chapter in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe so our community can keep growing and we can reach more fans like you. See you in the next video. In the meantime, if you're from the near future, I'll leave you the next chapter and a comic you're sure to enjoy. Thank you for being part of this adventure.